afternoon. My name's Andrew Mueller. I'm originally from Australia, one of the other great Greek-speaking nations, but I'm now based in London, where I host the weekly program, The Foreign Desk, for Monocle Radio, so tune straight in when you're done here. The subject of today's discussion is the implications of a stalled EU enlargement, particularly in the region just north of where we are gathered, and I've got every confidence that between us up here on stage, we can sort the entire Balkans out in about 45 minutes. Really, how hard can it be? We have a stellar cast here this afternoon. Catherine Ashton, the Baroness Ashton of Up Holland, who is High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the EU Commission. Besart Kadia, who's the Deputy Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs for Albania. Zoran Miljanić, Minister without Portfolio in Montenegro. Angelina Eichhorst, Managing Director for Europe and Central Asia at the European External Action Service. And a late addition, Dragijiana Petrović, Vice President of the Serbian Association of Economists. It's quite strange to think, talking about this particular subject, that we are coming up for the 10th anniversary of the last time a new country joined the European Union. That was, of course, Croatia. And in that time, Kathy, at the risk of tearing open a still suppurating wound, one country has actually left. If you think back 10 years, would you have imagined that 10 years hence, not only would the EU have got no larger, it would actually have got smaller?
No, I would have hoped that my country would have stayed within the European Union, and also that we would have been able to move forward with what has been an obvious element of EU enlargement for decades, which is that the countries of the Western Balkans should become full members of the EU. And you can see that, Andrew, if you get in a helicopter and you look at Europe, you can see that there is absolutely no question that these countries should be in the EU. It's good for them economically, politically, in terms of security. It's good for the EU in terms of completing, if you like, that part of enlargement. Now, there's more to be done, not least because of Ukraine and thinking about the countries to the east as well. But in the context of looking back to when I was in office and the work we were doing in the Western Balkans, which Angelina knows a huge amount about and is continuing with, there's absolutely no question that moving them towards the EU, supporting them to give them the tools they need to be able to become members is vital.
Well, this is where I guess we should bring in the two of the countries which are in the queue. And if we look at Albania, Besart, how stalled exactly does the process feel to you right now?
Well, I would like to have a positive note rather than see it as a negative stalled. The reason being, we had the opening of negotiations in July this year, last year, which gives us a clear perspective on countries doing their homework, finding that eventually the European Union has given it the green light. In that perspective, we see as a commitment for our own internal institutional progress, democratization, the rule of law. So all these European values have been the anchor for our future political commitment and for the transformation of our country. So in that regard, from Albanian perspective, even though there were many chances in the past for what happened last July to have happened previously, still we believe that finally the European Union has turned its full commitment to the Western Balkans, which of course the war in Ukraine accelerated it, and therefore given the security perspective but also all the enlargement perspective, I think we are on the right track finally.
And to Montenegro, how stalled does the process feel? Does EU membership feel like something that's fairly proximate or quite a remote prospect at this point?
Ja ću govoriti na crnogorskom jeziku. I will speak on Montenegrin language.
Sure.
Mi smo pregovore započeli za nas davne 2012. godine. Znači već 11 godina smo pregovorima. To je dugačak period. Od 33 poglavlja zatvoreno je svega 5. ali moramo znati da je u Crnoj Gori do 30. avgusta 2020. godine vlast bila u jednom dugačkom periodu od 30 godina i tek od tamo 2020. godine je došlo do negdje napretka u onim poglavljima koje su Crnu Goru najviše isputavale i sprečavale da bude efikasnija u odnosu na priključenje Evropskoj uniji, što je negdje jedini cilj Crne Gore, da uđe u porodicu razvijenih zemalja, odnosno Evropsku uniju. Ti problemi su upravo bili poglavlje 23, poglavlje 24, pravda i bezbjednost. Borba protiv korupcije je bila na jako niskom nivou i možemo se pohvaliti da tek u prethodnom izvještaju Evropske komisije borba protiv korupcije i organizovanog kriminala je dobila pozitivnu ocjenu. Sve se to i ubrzalo i mi smo u zadnjem periodu procesuirali jedan veći broj vladinih zvaničnika, kako iz prethodnog, tako i iz sadašnje vlasti, što znači da su negdje svi građani jednaki pred zakonom, što je osnova pravne države i smatram da više ne postoje nikakve prepreke da Crna Gora ne bude u što kraćem periodu kao lider u evropskim integracijama u regionu, jer smatram da je interes Evropske komisije da negdje i druge zemlje vide šansu da će što brže biti, što prije biti primljene u Evropsku uniju, da budu efikasnije i da bi Crna Gora morala biti pozitivan primjer Evropskoj uniji, pozitivan primjer svim ostalim zemljama Zapadnog Balkana, da taj san može postati realnost i da i jedna država sa Zapadnog Balkana, odnosno u narednom periodu sve države Zapadnog Balkana, moraju biti dio razvijene porodice koja se zove Evropska unija. To nam je jedini cilj i mislim da je to negdje i najefikasniji način kako da svi problemi i konflikti koji su u ranijem periodu bili na Balkanu baš postanu prošlost i da ponovo negdje u okviru i u sklopu Evropske unije budemo svi zajedno.
Angelina, to bring you in, you had the advantage of the earpiece for at least some of that. Was there anything there that you wish to agree with or disagree with? And in so doing, perhaps you could relay some of the text there.
Thank you. I regret I couldn't hear the minister completely, but I have big respect for Montenegro, Albania, Serbia, everybody here today. Let me be very clear. The enlargement process is not stalled. So the title of this panel, something is there we need to play with, but more than that, we are very, very serious. I want to take you back maybe to the early 90s when we had the breakup of the Soviet Union and the institutions had to cater for many new countries coming in. Today we have 10 countries lined up to join the European Union. Our partners in the Balkans, we have what we call the trio, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Turkey, of course. That is a huge opportunity, and the message I'm giving you right from the institutions, from inside, take this momentum, take this opportunity. It cannot be that for once the EU is perhaps a little bit more ready than the partners are in the Western Balkans. We cannot have regression at a point in time in history when we actually want to prepare for the bigger wave of the countries and partners that will join us, because it's going to happen. It's a security imperative for the European Union. It's an economic imperative. These are the facts on the ground. In the Council, of course, the mood among the member states is not the way we would all like to see it. We know this very well. It's about shaping and making and trying to see where the balance is. But what happened last year in terms of the Balkans, candidate states in Bosnia, we started opening negotiations, Albania, North Macedonia, visa liberalization for Kosovo, and finally back again Serbia-Kosovo negotiations to work on the dialogue. Cathy Ashton spent so many hours and all your political capital as well for a very good cause for the 2013 agreement. This is all back on track. Difficult. A lot of issues that need to be resolved. But at least can we use the momentum today where you see within the EU, member states are trying to see how can we better function when we are 37? How can we make the decision processes better? How can we today actually have the Balkans take active part in the single market? The single market is per se the tool not to replace enlargement, but to already prepare for everything that's coming up, because I can talk about it for hours about the single market, but Western Balkan people, populations, leaders know the homework that needs to be done. So basically, my message is not stalled, a lot of homework, but can we do it quicker, faster together to actually meet the impediment out there for all of us?
Just a quick follow-up then. If you wouldn't call the enlargement process stalled, is there a better word you would use?
We are enlarging the enlargement, deepening the enlargement, but we have to make it better, faster, more efficient, that the people really feel. The people feel on the ground in the countries that member states are working as hard as they do to make this happen. We are not changing conditionalities. It will have to be, again, along merit, along the criteria we know. This is not going to change. Much more focus on the rule of law. But what I would call is, I would turn it around and say the opportunity now for enlargement is right out there.
Dragijiana, to bring you in with a variation on the question we put to Montenegro and Albania, in fact, barely a variation, more or less exactly the same question. In Serbia right now, how likely, remote, plausible a prospect does EU membership seem?
It's very difficult question, because we have to go back a little bit. In 2003, when the European Council in Thessaloniki on their Congress has high priority to speed up the process of accession of the whole Western Balkan countries. All of us, all of our countries are candidate countries, at least 10, 11 years, up to North Macedonia, who is from 2005, which is 18 years. So that journey is a very, very long. It's a roller coaster for our countries, really. We are in the European Union. We treat ourselves as a member of European continent first. And hopefully, we will be one day member of European Union family. But I don't know, it's a very moving target for us. You know, you have to comply, you have to negotiate 35 chapters. Serbia currently negotiating 22, and only 2 out of 35 was closed for 10 or 11 years candidacy. So how many years we will need additional to comply with all this? I agree, we have a special situation with Kosovo and all this negotiation, and it's something which has to be settled on political level. But all others, let's say that one chapter is related to Kosovo issue, but all others, 34, can be settled and can be done. I think that there are, you know, in each process of negotiations, there are two sides. I was state secretary in the Ministry of Finance as a national authorizing officer, and I was running and negotiating some of them. And I was dealing with EU funds and everything. And there, it's not mistake only on our sides. Very often it comes from both sides, let's say. We have to speed up the process. Otherwise, as you know, the public sector, the public opinion is losing emotions towards EU. Because we are chasing EU and they're always running away, and they're faster, and we cannot reach them. So we would really like to have, we are ready to be efficient, and I think that our public administration is pretty efficient in negotiations and in all this alignment of rules and laws and bylaws and everything. But you have to be aware that this room is small to get all the documentation for one chapter, for one small chapter, to be adjusted, to be aligned. So this is really a huge, huge job to be done in front all of us. But you know, if you love someone and you love them for 20 years and you can continue to love for additional 20 years, but what's next? You know, we will be old. We will be old, and then what we can do? We cannot produce family anymore. So we need to help each other in this process. That's the main message, because Europe is our far dominant trade partners with 70% of participation of all Western Balkans. It's from 60 to 70, it depends. For Europe, the whole Western Balkans participate only with 1.4 in foreign trade. So you see the difference, how important you are to us, and how maybe not that high priority are we to you. But we love each other still. I hope that we will survive in this joint path towards the EU.
Besart, I'll bring you in on that point, and let's see if we can get Serbia and Albania to agree on something, which would be a moment of triumph for our panel this afternoon. Does it feel like that to you sometimes, that the EU is not making this perhaps as easy or straightforward as they could?
Well, I'll share the same experience. I've led 5 chapters of the negotiation process, and they're tough. You're absolutely right. I mean, the level of bureaucracy we're talking about, 50 years of legislation that our countries are trying to catch up. So every time there's a moving target, and of course we don't have that experience. We haven't gone through that process before. This is new for us. That's important to emphasize, that sometimes we also need more support than actually just giving targets and values. So this is on our perspective. The European Union for us remains the most important partner in terms of trade. We feel integrated. The amount of exports to the EU, it is right, it's 70%. It's one of the most important partners economically, and politically it remains one of the objectives that we still believe that is our shared values, but trying to translate them into institutions and trying to make the whole public aware on the new standards and everything that will change in the future. It's something that it has been a moving target. I remember back in 1990, when communism collapsed, people were saying we want Albania as Europe. And maybe they thought maybe next week, in 2 weeks' time, we would enter the EU. Because, I mean, we were naive in a way. So we thought that now finally we're free. The European Union will embrace us because they need us, or because they will make something that went wrong 50 years ago during communism. And the moving target has been for 30 years. So it's people are feeling fatigued, and they trust that this will happen eventually. You need to remind them that it will happen, and the government takes it as a priority to make the business community and the bureaucracy trying to understand it. But it's not easy. I mean, it's something that from past experience, we still remain optimistic, but then again, a pessimistic is someone who has experience. So,
I mean, Kathy, at which point we should talk about, well, as the title of the discussion suggests, that there will be implications, and I think there's an implied thunderclap behind implications there. Is it potentially actually dangerous that these countries are left for so long outside either or both of the umbrellas provided by the EU and NATO?
So I think, first of all, we should not see this as a one-sided problem. I mean, all countries trying to get into the EU find themselves having to go through an incredibly tortuous process of opening and closing chapters. And that process never gets easier. If anything, it gets harder. And it always takes significantly longer than any country ever thinks. But there is no other way of doing it, because without that process, you're not really able to be fully part of all of the different elements of being in the EU. So you just got to do it. And the Commission actually is the one that is usually leaning forward in trying to get things to move forward. There are some challenges in member states, because in the context of where member states are, enlargement is not always a popular thing when it comes to domestic politics. And as I've often said, when members of the EU get together, when the member states gather, they don't stop being domestic politicians and become nice Europeans. They kind of carry all of their own problems into the room with them. And that means when you look across Europe with 27 countries, there's always an election about to happen, and there's always an election coalition group being put together somewhere, and there's always a set of issues that are driving domestic policy, often economic. So there are lots of things that get sort of mixed up in the whole question of enlargement. But to get to the essence of your question, it's absolutely crucial that when we think about where we are in security and foreign policy terms now, we look at what's going on in Ukraine, we look at where Russia is, we think about this multipolar world that is evolving, where the poles, as Alex Stubb was saying earlier today, are not necessarily going to be based on the same values and the same ideals as the one that we respect, admire, and are part of, then it's pretty obvious that ensuring that our nearest neighbours and countries with whom we have long relationships are able to become part of Europe, part of sharing those values and ideals, and part of moving forward economically and politically. So it's not about being stalled, but it is about making sure the momentum keeps going. Because I understand, and I know that in Serbia and Albania, Montenegro, people get really fed up of hearing the EU go on about, you've got to open chapter this or do that. And people say, well, what's the point? But actually, there is a much, much bigger point. There's a much bigger thing at stake here, which is what kind of societies you want to live in, what kind of creative pole we are creating around Europe that is going to be extraordinarily important as we look at the challenges that we're going to face in the future.
But Zoran, to go back to Montenegro, as long as you are outside the European Union, and especially for a geographically small country and a country with a reasonably small population, is there a feeling of vulnerability, especially as we have seen what has happened over the last year and a bit in Ukraine, but also given what we know of Russia's interference in Moldova, Russia's fairly obvious stirring of the pot in Serbia and Republika Srpska? Does Montenegro feel vulnerable the longer it is not a member?
A kao što ste rekli, mi jesmo mala zemlja, geografski mala, po istoriji svojoj velika, i važno istaći da je Crna Gora članica NATO saveza, da Crna Gora ide, interes Crne Gore su evroatlantske integracije, i Crna Gora je jako daleko od svih ovih zemalja koje ste nabrojali, i od Moldavije, i od Republike, odnosno Bosne i Hercegovine, konkretnije Republike Srpske, i drugih zemalja koje nijesu članice NATO saveza. Crna Gora baštini evropske vrijednosti. Crna Gora ima sektor bezbjednosti koji je potpuno kompatibilan sa partnerskim službama Evropske unije i Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Crna Gora ima izuzetno dobre regionalne odnose sa svim susjedima, što je, čini mi se, na Balkanu najvažnije. Crna Gora održava zajedničke sjednice vlada sa zemljama susjedima, kao što je bilo prethodnog mjeseca sa Albanijom, kao što će biti i sa Sjevernom Makedonijom u narednom periodu. Intenzivni su susreti na najvišem nivou sa svim predsjednicima i premijerima zemalja regiona, tako da ja stvarno ne vidim ni jedan problem zašto Crna Gora u nekom kraćem vremenskom periodu, u narednom periodu, ne bi postala članica Evropske unije, pogotovo imajući u vidu da je skoro 80% stanovništva Crne Gore jednoglasno u tome da Crna Gora mora biti članica Evropske unije i da je to jedini cilj i jedina budućnost za sve građane Crne Gore. Tako da, ponavljam, bilo je problema kroz poglavlja 23 i 24. Mislim da se ti problemi rešavaju. U prethodnom periodu takvih slučajeva teško da ima bilo gdje, pogotovo u regionu, da su procesuirani predsjednica Vrhovnog suda, predsjednik Privrednog suda, specijalni državni tužilac, šef policije i jedan čitavi niz, šef uprave prihoda i carina. Znači, jedan čitavi niz vladinih zvaničnika i negdje kod nas stvarno postaje da bude ono najvažnije da smo mi svi jednaki pred zakonom. I mislim da je to cilj i da je to glavni narativ i Evropske unije i da smo mi negdje dostigli taj cilj, da smo mi prilagodili naše zakonodavstvo kroz sve ove godine Evropskoj uniji, tako da, apsolutno, imajući sve to u vidu, naravno ne mogu reći da ne postoji opasnost od tog hibridnog, takozvanog hibridnog uticaja Ruske federacije, ali mi se u Crnoj Gori uspješno odolijevamo i mislim da tu nemamo nekih većih problema, ali svakako da bi zajedno bili još jači i svakako da bi zajedno potpuno onemogućili takve vrste uticaja, a kada je Zapadni Balkan u pitanju, znate kako, kroz istoriju smo se valjda uvjerili da je na Zapadnom Balkanu sve moguće. I mislim da Evropska unija mora podstaći zemlje Zapadnog Balkana da budu dio evropske porodice, jer, kako reče prethodna govornica, prolazi dugo godina i ako je već prošlo, recimo, 10 u slučaju Crne Gore, smatram da bi neki naredni četvorogodišnji period, jer imajući u vidu da su u Crnoj Gori parlamentarni izbori 11. juna, bio negdje optimalan da i Crna Gora postane punopravna članica Evropske unije.
Angelina, Kathy adumbrated one of the potential reluctances that might be at large, whether spoken or unspoken, among extant EU members, and that is, of course, that enlargement has tended in a lot of jurisdictions to be pretty unpopular. It has allowed populist anti-immigrant politicians to flourish. It resulted, you could certainly argue, in Brexit. But beyond that, among especially the older, more established EU members, is there any sense, whether spoken, unspoken, acknowledged or not, of a reluctance to take on board potential, let's call them problem children like Poland or Hungary?
Well, I said earlier, one of the key conditions will remain and has been strengthened is the rule of law. There is absolutely no doubt about it. You can't become member of the European Union if you don't go by the book of the rule of law. And the issues we have internally in the EU, they are there, nobody denies, and there are also ways of addressing this and solving these issues. What I want to come back to is this whole point of how important enlargement is now in view of the war, and what we actually have been doing. It was mentioned by many of you on support for security and defense. We have massively now invested in the Western Balkans and the other partners on hybrid. The minister explained it very well. Montenegro is one, but it goes for all 6. We have massively now invested economically in terms of the investment plans, getting the investment coming into the Western Balkans and to create those jobs which are needed. So this is really not about opening a chapter 1 or 2. And then I want to come back to the point Kathy made. If as a country, your leaders your leadership decides that I want my people to be member of the European Union, you do this, you do all that needs to be done regardless of a particular opening of a chapter. And I see some of the leaders actually in the region give also that message. Others, you know, everybody has his political weighing to do on what narrative there is, but the narrative is pretty negative these days, right, on the European Union. And this we have to address. The member states internally, you don't win elections when you address enlargement, we know this, but there is a far more positive narrative internally in the European Union. Because we explain better today why it is in everybody's interest that we are part of one family. And the war has changed that whole narrative. But also in the region, it is important that the leaders continue to explain why they do what they have to do. My last word is on Greece, since we are in Delphi, fantastic Delphi. And I just want to mention how important Greece is in the council, in the room, in supporting enlargement. The Greek leadership had actually the vision of saying, why don't we try and really move more focused and faster towards a certain date? I think this shows courage, and it is important, because you need to have, in the end, you need to have somewhere a point where all the countries who want to join the EU can say, okay, by that certain moment in time, I will actually be in. So there has to be that consistency of member states. The message that we say you want to be in, we know you're going to work. Once you have done, when you deliver, we deliver. That it really has to come in motion. And member states have to somehow, in some way, keep the bilateral issues out of the room, because a lot we see, Kathy mentioned it before, on the domestic side, but a lot we see that whenever a bilateral issue can become part of the discussion, it's not going in the right direction. We have to stay strategic, long-term, and I think this is going to happen. I'm pretty optimistic that we will find the solutions in the institutions together with the member states to make this process now once and for all a process where people feel that it is real.
Of course, I mean, I think nationalist populism can have more than one cause, of course. And Dragijiana, if we think of Serbia in particular, is there a worry that if it seems ever remote and like it's not getting any closer, and to return to your earlier metaphor that the distance up the aisle to the altar is just getting further and further and further, does that make an inflammation of Serbian politics in particular more likely? Very recent Serbian history has a recurrent theme of populist politicians leaning very hard on the poor, beleaguered, misunderstood Serbia, it's us against the world motif.
I think that although I said that public support is on historical lowest level, dropped from 70 to 35% to support the European Union, but the normal people are 100% for supporting European Union, because there is no other path for us. We are in the heart of the Europe, and there is no other way for us. And it will be very helpful what Angelina said. If we will know, it will be in 2029, 32, but we will know the date. And all of us, all the member states, because you know that in the process of negotiation, some of the states can do blockade of others to continue with some, as was the case with Bulgaria and North Macedonia. So it will be good to avoid those scenarios. So to know exactly the date and what exactly we have to do, what you have to do, and to have a clear path towards EU. Because just from the economical point of view, as I'm coming from the Serbian Association of Economists, only the previous panel mentioned that as well. Only trucks, when you're coming to Serbia, if you're coming by car, you will see kilometers and kilometers of trucks waiting for customs, for all inspections and everything. It costs Serbia at least 1% of GDP. It's very difficult to to have a growth of 1% GDP, and you will just have it because of alignment of everything, and that because we will be one single market. So there are a lot of improvements, on soft improvements, which will bring European Union, our membership to European Union to us. And another thing very important for us, we are, as a candidate country, receiving pre-accession instruments, IPA funds, and its amount roughly 200 million euros per year. If we would be a member state, it will be 20 to 30 times higher, so we will count billions. For the last 20 years, we have received 3 billion. So in 1 year, we will receive more than 3 billions. Of course, we know that we have to contribute and everything, but an economist and as the economic cooperation and all incentives are for both sides, because we will be open, it will be one market. We already have a lot of FDIs, a lot of companies for our biggest partner, as I said, and in FDI comes from European Union. So we are definitely, even if some statistic and some shows that it is historically at the lowest level, it is not something what we feel as a normal people who believe that we belong to Europe and Europe belongs to us, and we want to be together. So there is no any other path for us.
Besart, to come back to Albania, is there another concern, as long as this desire stays unrequited, that Albania will start to face what I know is a problem which has concerned various Albanian politicians, certainly as the country has improved dramatically over the last 20 years, of keeping people in Albania, of making this a country that people don't want to leave. Is it harder to do that the longer Albania isn't in the EU?
I think there's a complete difference between political reason for leaving the country and economic reasons. And going back to the economic reasons, as long as we are very close to one of the most advanced economies or markets in the world, with high standards and high levels of living, I guess there's always an attraction for people from the region to go and work in the European Union. But what is happening, I think, in the region is, as long as these countries remain outside of the European Union and the possibility of further economic assistance, we have to build our infrastructure, health service, education, with a limited budget coming from a developing economy. So at the same time you're doing reforms, you have to do investments to keep people in the country. Therefore, there's a divergence between countries in the region that are part of the European Union and getting funds and developing even further, and countries that have to, the 6 countries that have to do all the reforms and trying to keep people and to make the economic development and political reforms at the same time. So it's a process that it takes time, and people might feel that eventually they will leave the country and try to find a better future. You cannot stop that. But what we do find out, unlike, I guess, in other countries, especially if that is true, that in Serbia the support is diminished, in Albania, European Union still remains, Albania remains still a very pro-European country. The public wants to be in the European Union. They actually, the politicians see it as if they divert from that commitment or their desire, they will not be popular in Albania. So there is not a fear of losing public support. Still, we haven't seen that. But we want European Union so much that we want to, most people leave and go to live there. So in order to stop that, I think we should give a little bit more priority to also the economic reasons why people are leaving and what can be done in the future.
We're coming towards the end of our time. We've got 7 or so minutes left. And I did want to talk a bit about what the future might hold. And Angelina, I said at the start that we are sitting here about, give or take, 10 years since the last country joined the EU. If the 5 of us are all gathered here, 6 of us are all gathered here 10 years from now, how many more countries do you think the EU might reasonably have gotten around to adding by then?
That's a great question. And I think you should ask the countries first, you know, in a way that
all really of us would like to be with you, so don't ask us.
Yeah. But, and you know, and frankly, I think it's very much a question for the countries themselves. But if you see how the speed goes now, and we were just listening to the Deputy Minister of Albania, for instance, Albania has been really, really catching up with a lot. For those of us who know Albania from some time ago and today, if you allow me to say so, Minister, it's a huge, huge difference. And I'm not trying to be the diplomat here, but obviously I cannot say who goes first. We tried that in 2018. We came up with a fantastic policy paper. Some of those who wrote it are sitting here in the room. And we actually used front runners and we used other kind of, today we wouldn't do that anymore. But what I want to say, the dynamic is very, very different. And the point is who is driving the dynamic today. And it is very unfortunate because because of the war, but it is Ukraine really actually wanting to be so much member of the EU now, and we have said as a candidate country, you will be on that path. So it's a different dimension. It's not only 6 Western Balkans. It's what I said earlier. You know, with Turkey, with the trio, we are in a very different framework of work, and that's what I'm trying to reflect also to our colleagues in the Western Balkans. Realize this change and work as fast as you can. And then maybe in 10 years' time, we are a very big European Union. I'm looking at the United Kingdom.
Kathy, I know you've spoken a bit at Delphi this week about how the enormous soft power of the EU is in itself kind of a hard power. And I'm just wondering if, and this is going to seem like a counterintuitive question a bit, because the EU, I think, as an institution is not usually short on regard for itself or its manifold virtues. But that notwithstanding, do you think it still undervalues or underrates what it means as an aspiration to those countries which are not in it? Because just thinking myself this year, we have seen the coverage of those protests in Georgia, where we've seen protesters hoisting the EU flag as a sort of rebel standard. It's the thing to which they aspire. We've seen Ukraine hanging huge EU flags off government buildings in Kiev. And I can remember traveling in Albania and Kosovo many years ago when no one was talking seriously about the idea of either of them going anywhere near NATO or the EU, and yet everywhere you went, you saw the NATO and the EU flag flying. So, Kathy, does the EU, I think, kind of forget that some of the time?
I don't think it forgets it, but I can remember being in Maidan in the winter of 2013 in Kiev, and in temperatures that were so freezing cold. And all you could see were EU flags everywhere at a time when nobody in Ukraine had really pushed that voice that said, we want to be a member. They wanted a relationship. There were some people, but the vast majority had not yet reached that point. And you could feel that momentum that said, if you think about it logically from where they were then, this was what was obvious suddenly, that actually to be part of the EU was where they belong. And I think for the Western Balkans countries, they've made that journey intellectually. I mean, there's a lot of concern about public opinion, but public opinion ebbs and flows, partly depending on whether you think you're going to get what you want. If you don't feel that you're going to get into the EU, then you'll say, well, I don't want it. So I think public opinion would change quite rapidly and will change as the process speeds up. It's a difficult and challenging process to do for all the reasons we've said. The bigger the EU grows, the more challenging will be the internal workings, all of the institutional framework, numbers of commissioners, all of that stuff that goes alongside it. But we have a really unique opportunity to build something that will be incredibly important in soft and hard power terms for the future of the world. And so everybody here is committed to doing that. Just needs to keep going forward.
Well, we've only got about a minute and a half left. So for very final words, I will come to you, Zoran, as a representative of these countries which are still outside the EU. Do you personally feel more optimistic than you did 48 minutes ago?
Yes.
Ja sam vječiti optimista. Tako da samo se nadam da to neće biti vječnost, nego da će put u Crne Gore u Evropsku uniju biti kratak i efikasan. Ono što zavisi od Crne Gore, mi se trudimo, dajemo sve od sebe to i rezultati pokazuju, a sve ostalo je na Europskoj uniji, na Europskoj komisiji da procijeni da li smo mi uradili dovoljno da budemo članica, prva sljedeća članica Europske unije, a ponavljam, Crna Gora je mala zemlja i bio bi veliki podstrek prijem bilo koje zemlje sa Zapadnog Balkana, pogotovo Crne Gore, za sve ostale zemlje Zapadnog Balkana, jer kao što smo čuli podatak koji mene izuzetno zabrinjava, da je u Srbiji pala u javnom mnjenju sa 70 na 35%, znači da građani gube vjeru u Evropsku uniju, gube poverenje u Evropsku uniju, što nije ni malo dobro. Ja se nadam da će ovih 75-80% u Crnoj Gori porasti još više i da će Evropska unija imati taj feeling, imati taj osjećaj da negdje iskorači i da zemlje Zapadnog Balkana postanu članice, punopravne članice Evropske unije.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Catherine Ashton, Besart, Kadia, Zoran Miljanić, Angelina Eichhorst, and Dragijiana Petrović. Thank you all very much for your contributions, and thank you for listening.